Thank you for joining us for this update of the Broad Branch Road reconstruction project. Originally, DDOT had planned to hold a public meeting to present the findings of the revised draft environmental assessment. However, in order to reduce the risk for COVID-19, as defined by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, and Mayor Bowser's current coronavirus 2019 Phase 2 guidance to stay home, stay healthy, and stay connected, this presentation is provided in digital format for your review. It has been nearly 7 years since the publication of the initial environmental assessment for the project. Since that time, DDOT has been coordinating with other federal and district agencies, as well as foreign embassies, to complete the environmental process. Recognizing the extended period of time since the initial environmental document was published, DDOT and the Federal Highway Administration decided to prepare a revised draft environmental assessment. The revised draft was approved for public review on October 15th by the Federal Highway Administration. The following presentation will provide you with an overview of the project, along with an update on activities that have taken place since the original environmental assessment was issued in October 2013, as well as the changes and updates in the revised document and the next steps in the project's development process. These include an overview of the existing conditions along the roadway and the identified need for improvements, environmental considerations along the corridor, how improvement concepts were developed, descriptions of the alternatives presented in the initial environmental assessment, followed by a description of the new modified alternative, which is DDOT's preferred alternative, the potential environmental impacts of each of the alternatives, and the next steps in the environmental process as well as future design and construction phases. First, let's go back to where this project began nearly 9 years ago. At the time, the Federal Highway Administration and DDOT began environmental studies for proposals to rehabilitate the 1.5-mile segment of Broad Branch Road from Linnean Avenue down to almost Beach Road. As shown here on this map, almost the entire eastern border of the roadway borders Rock Creek Park. Since this park is owned by the federal government and maintained by the National Park Service, the Park Service has agreed to become a cooperating agency in this study. On the west side of the roadway are clusters of residential homes, including properties that serve as diplomatic residences for sovereign nations. It is these national park lands and diplomatic residences that have been the reasons for years of extensive coordination between DDOT, the National Park Service, and the sovereign nations through the U.S. State Department, but more on that later. Because this project is considered a federal action, the current environmental study is being performed in accordance with the National Environmental Policy Act, or NEPA. NEPA requires that the potential environmental impacts of all federal actions be considered prior to implementation. In the case of this project, there are several factors that make it a federal action, including federal funding, federal permits, and the possible use of federal lands owned by the National Park Service. Therefore, under NEPA, this environmental assessment has been prepared for the proposed actions. The initial environmental assessment was completed in October 2013, and a public hearing was held the following month. This revised draft environmental assessment has been prepared based on the comments received on the 2013 document. Additional analysis was conducted and has now been released for public review and comment. The first step in the NEPA study was to identify the existing conditions along the roadway corridor. For many of you that live or travel the corridor, much of this will be very evident. For years, there has been uncontrolled runoff from the elevated parcels, particularly to the west of the roadway, which has led to the deterioration of the existing roadway, as well as impacting water quality upon receiving waters of Rock Creek Park. For those of you who travel this roadway in the evenings, once it becomes dark, there are safety issues associated with the lack of lighting. Local residents have been requesting safe sidewalks along the roadway be considered. as well as improved pedestrian and bicycle access to and from the park. DDOT has also heard numerous concerns of speeding on the roadway as it exists today, and the possibility of what it could be like in the future. And if you look at the traffic data on the roadway, it actually carries more volume than you would anticipate. Although rural in nature, the roadway provides a major cut-through and results in the traffic volume shown on this slide. By recognizing these conditions, it helps the project team define the purpose and need for this particular project. In very simple terms, the purpose of this study and the proposed action is to rehabilitate Broad Branch Road by correcting the poor road conditions as well as improving drainage to better control stormwater runoff. Broad Branch Road is also traveled by pedestrians and bicyclists. Several members of the community have indicated that they would like to see improvements for these two modes of travel, by including sidewalks and bike lanes. Others have indicated that they would like to have improved access to Rock Creek Park. And listed last on the slide, but certainly not least, is safety. One of the overriding factors for improving this roadway is to improve the safety of all those that travel upon it. While developing improvement concepts for the roadway, the project team had to be aware of the numerous environmental considerations that are present along the roadway. As noted earlier, Rock Creek Park and Broad Branch Stream border almost the entire eastern edge of this 1.5-mile segment. Water quality in both Broad Branch and Rock Creek has been degraded over the years, some of it attributed to the uncontrolled runoff that comes down from the western slopes and across the roadway before entering these receiving waters. The roadway also traverses a variety of land uses, including residential neighborhoods, embassy residences for 5 different sovereign nations, parks, and several community facilities. And unbeknownst to many, the area surrounding the roadway contains several cultural and historic resources. As we have noted, there are a number of natural resources in the project area. Most are associated with Broad Branch, either the water itself or the habitat that it provides along its course. There are also several historic resources in the area. 2 historic districts bound the roadway and include historic trails and bridges. And there are long lengths of historic stone walls and stone boundary markers associated with Rock Creek Park along the length of the roadway. The roadway is also lined with a number of residential and community facilities. As shown in the figure on the left, there are embassy residences, parks, schools, and religious facilities, all nearby and many of which are accessed either directly or indirectly by this segment of Broad Branch Road. And, as noted in the project's purpose and need, the roadway itself provides a very important link, not just up and down Broad Branch Road, but also for the many connections that it provides for commuters and park visitors. It truly serves its intended purpose and actually accommodates higher volumes than was originally anticipated. All of the factors described in the purpose and need were taken into consideration as improvement concepts were developed. Meetings were held with resource agencies and the general public to solicit their input in the concept development process, and by applying the building blocks approach illustrated in this slide. Individuals, with often very different opinions, were asked how they thought this roadway should operate, or what features should be incorporated. Some wanted it to do nothing more than to simply carry automobile traffic. There were others who said, if we're going to make this improvement, why not make it safer for pedestrians by including sidewalks on one or both sides? And there was also a large contingent of bicycle enthusiasts that wanted a bicycle lane to be included. All of these comments were taken into consideration. The project team looked at different ways of constructing the roadway, including various lane widths, different types of curb and gutter, sidewalks with varying widths, protected bikeways, stormwater management, and green spaces. The challenge became, how do you incorporate all of the desired features within a limited amount of city-owned right-of-way? On the northern end of the project, The district right-of-way is as wide as 90 to 120 feet. However, on the southern end, it is limited in some areas to 30 feet. Commenters who said, "I want wider roadways. I want improved curb and gutter. I want sidewalks. I want bike lanes," came to the realization that they were asking to fit a 50-foot wide facility in 30 feet of available right-of-way. And if concepts exceeded the width of the existing right-of-way, then there would be right-of-way constraints both on the east and the west side of the roadway, and some of the environmental features described previously would be impacted. That is the process that was used, along with more detailed engineering analysis that resulted in the set of candidate alternatives listed here that are evaluated in the revised draft environmental assessment. The initial environmental assessment included 4 candidate alternatives, one of which is called the no build or no action. For this alternative, DDOT, as the owner of the roadway, would continue to maintain the roadway on a routine basis and keep it as safe as possible without any major reconstruction. It goes without saying that the no action alternative does not meet the purpose and need of the project. However, the no action alternative does serve as a baseline when comparing the benefits and effects of the candidate build alternatives. These comparisons are included in the environmental assessment and will be illustrated later in this presentation. 3 build alternatives were evaluated in the original environmental assessment. These are simply referred to as alternatives 2, 3, and 4. After issuance of the environmental assessment, a 4th alternative was developed to further minimize potential encroachments on Rock Creek Park and Embassy lands. This alternative is referred to as Alternative 3 Modified. Each of the candidate build alternatives have several common improvement features and are presented in the following slides. Candidate build Alternative 2 represents the minimum width improvement that could be done within the existing DDOT-owned right-of-way and meets the project's purpose and need. It would rehabilitate the 2 existing 10-foot travel lanes along with the addition of standard curb and gutter on both the east and west sides of the roadway. On the northern end, where there is additional right-of-way available, the standard curb and gutter on the west side of the roadway would be replaced with bioswale or linear rain garden to better control stormwater runoff. That was a greener way of accommodating the runoff and tied into a daylighting program implemented by the District Department of Energy and Environment. Alternative 2 is estimated to cost $33.7 million and would take about 24 months for construction. The next alternative, Alternative 3. This alternative expanded the overall width of the project by including a continuous sidewalk. As shown in this slide, the typical section would include 2 10-foot travel lanes with standard curb and gutter, with the exception again at the northern end where the linear bioswale replaces the concrete gutter. A new 6-foot wide sidewalk would be included on the west side of the roadway for the entire length. This alternative involves more infrastructure than Alternative 2, and thus involves more land, cost, and a longer construction period. Alternative 3 is estimated to cost $43.7 million and would take an estimated 30 months to construct. Alternative 4 was developed to accommodate all 3 modes of transportation: autos, pedestrians, and bicycles, and as a result, it is the widest of the alternatives. It incorporates the same 2 10-foot travel lanes and 6-foot sidewalks, but it also incorporates a 4-foot bike lane on the eastern side of the roadway. It was felt that it would be safe to put a bike climbing lane on the east side to allow cyclists to travel up the hill. Coming down the hill, cyclists would be merged with roadway traffic. This alternative involves the most infrastructure of all the build alternatives, and as a result, requires more additional right-of-way, higher cost, and a longer construction period. Alternative 4 is estimated to cost $57.5 million and requires a 36-month construction period. Each of the preceding alternatives were evaluated in the initial environmental assessment, which was released in 2013. Following publication of that environmental assessment document, DDOT continued to approach the U.S. State Department and the foreign embassies for the additional right-of-way needed to widen the roadway. After significant coordination, DDOT developed a revised alternative that would not encroach upon any of the sovereign nation's lands. This required the majority of the roadway widening to take place on the east side to accommodate this new change. This decision did, however, require the encroachment of 7 narrow slivers of land that are part of Rock Creek Park, as shown on this slide. Each of these encroachments was less than 12 inches wide. As owner of Rock Creek Park, the National Park Service was consulted in the development of the modified alternative and concurred that the narrow encroachments would have no major effect on the park property. The original Alternative 3 was modified to create this new alternative. The typical section would include the same two 10-foot travel lanes with standard curb and gutter, with the exception again at the northern end where the linear bioswale replaces the concrete gutter. Similar to Alternative 3, this modified alternative expanded the overall width of the project by including a continuous sidewalk. However, the sidewalk was reduced in width in areas along the sovereign nation properties and is shown in the next slide. This revised alternative involves slightly more infrastructure than the original Alternative 3, however, less new right-of-way. As a result, it achieves the goal of avoiding all encroachments upon embassy properties and lessens the overall environmental impacts. The modified alternative is estimated to cost more than Alternative 3 at $56.3 million. However, the construction time is expected to be the same at 30 months. After consideration of the added benefits and reduced impacts of this revised alternative, DDOT recommended Alternative 3 modified as the preferred alternative for design and construction. In developing the proposed improvements, the project team looked for ways to minimize the amount of cut and fill that would have to take place outside the edge of the existing roadway. Existing retaining walls would be rehabilitated where needed, and several new walls, such as those shown here, would be constructed. In addition, DDOT proposes to replace the culvert at Soapstone Creek. The original bridge culvert washed out several years ago during a major storm, and a temporary fix was put in place. A new bridge culvert will be constructed under each of the build alternatives. The revised draft environmental assessment includes refined assessments of each of the alternatives just described and presents their potential effects, both beneficial and negative. The next two slides present the results of these supplemental assessments and provide comparisons of each alternative's effects on the natural, cultural, and socioeconomic resources in the project area. The column representing the preferred alternative has been highlighted to allow easy comparison between it and the original Alternative 3. Please take a few moments to review each of the two slides. NEPA also requires several other evaluations and consultations be performed in accordance with other environmental regulations. These include Section 4F of the U.S. Department of Transportation Act of 1966, which requires the U.S. DOT to carefully evaluate any use of lands from parks, historic properties, or wildlife refuges. Section 106 of the National Historic Preservation Act, which requires consultation with the State Historic Preservation Office for any action that could affect resources listed on the National Register of Historic Places. FHWA and DDOT have entered into a Memorandum of Agreement with the National Park Service and the State Historic Preservation Office, which prescribes protection of historic resources in the project area. A copy of the fully executed agreement is presented in Appendix O of the Environmental Assessment. And finally, Section 7 of the Endangered Species Act, which requires protection of any threatened or endangered plant or animal species that may be found in the project area. The results of each of these evaluations and consultations are presented in the revised draft environmental assessment. This slide presentation is intended to provide you with a refresher on the project and a summary of the findings contained in the revised draft environmental assessment. A digital copy of the complete environmental document is available on this project website. Please take the time to provide the project team with your comments on the alternatives and the findings of the document. You can submit your written comments to the project team by using the Comment tab on this website. All written comments are due by November 16, 2020. This slide presents the estimated timeframe for the next steps in the project's development process. Following the formal approval of the preferred alternative, a combined final environmental assessment and decision document will be issued early next year. This will complete the environmental process. The final design phase of the project is estimated to begin next year and span approximately 24 months. Once final design is complete and a construction contractor is secured, construction of the project is expected to begin in 2023. Thank you for taking the time to learn more about this important project, and please continue to watch for further updates on this project website. Your participation is very important to the successful completion of this project.